Hello everyone, I am Navodit and today we are going to learn about iterative design and evaluation. So iterative design is a design methodology that involves a cyclic process of designing, prototyping, then testing and analyzing that design, and based on that we refine the product or that process. So to understand this methodology of design, we have a activity which is going to be designing a mascot for a Gen AI chatbot, and we have few criteria for the design: that it should be cute, then the design should be simple enough to understand, and it should look like a companion for that user, and lastly it should have that futuristic look to it. So let's start with our design. But before that, let me show how to locate drawing tool on Adobe Express. Click on the plus icon on the home page and on the text box search draw. It will show us two options. Select the drawing option and it will direct us to the drawing editor on which we will be working. So in Adobe Express we have this drawing tool where we are going to start with our first conceptual drawing, where we are going to use the symmetry tool and the pencil brush for jotting down our rough ideas or sketches. So let's start with this, and the brush and the combination of this symmetry tool help us quickly jot down the design or the concept of that particular mascot. So we are playing around with different combination of shapes, and since the design is supposed to be, it needs to be cute, we are taking the help of proportions of a baby, where the head is bigger in size and the body is a bit smaller, and we are using the combination of basic shapes because it's easier for human eye to easily read and understand those when we see it in our daily life. And next we have the criteria: it should look like a companion or a pet. So here we will make it something like a dog or a cat. And lastly, let's make it something futuristic, robotic type of design. So we have given this antenna, made it something like this boxy design. Then we are refining this design a bit more for understanding the shapes and everything. So here are the rough sketches or the rough exploration of the initial design, and let's evaluate these sketches or the design concepts we have created for our mascot. So we have variation of shapes, combination, even proportions also. So for the first one, this is a great start, but it's too big. The second one, it's looking like a baby and we want a companion or a pet, and this is too simple. But this one is looking much more aligning with the desire we have for our mascot. So let's go with this one. We will import the image we have downloaded from the last sketch, and we will scale it up on the canvas and reduce the opacity to further develop over it. So in the express drawing, the image layer will always lay in the background, and we can again sketch or paint over it and develop our concept more vividly. So in this process of refining our design furthermore towards what we are aiming is depicting that process of iterative design methodology. So here we are refining our existing design and adding some details to it. And now let's evaluate this one. This is looking much better from before, and there are some good elements also, but some of the elements are making it too detailed. So we need to simplify our design, since it will be the part of that chatbot. So we need to simplify those shapes, omit those details. And what if we made a small detail like the visor should look like a speech bubble, because it's a chatbot and it's a cat. So let's download this final sketch and we will import this image, and we will work again over it and revisit our design and making that changes we have decided in the last iteration. And this is our final design. So let's move ahead, upload this image on a darker background, and I'm reducing the opacity. And now finally we are going to render it using the different combination of brushes we have in Adobe Express Drawing. So this is the whole process of creating a or designing a mascot for a AI chatbot, and this process is following the methodology of iterative design. Where we are designing, prototyping, then evaluating our design, making changes, and going back towards that the initial stage of redesigning the concept, and that is helping us to make it the final design more appealing and more aligning with the desire of that particular criteria we have in the initial stage. And now with those iteration and final render using these wonderful brushes, we have this cute looking companion or a pet robot which is going to be there with the user when they are going to use that chatbot. And using the vast range of brushes and colors available in drawing features in Adobe Express, we got to learn about the iterative design process. It is commonly used in everything from brutalist web design to software development, and allow designers to incorporate feedback and make adjustment at every stage of the process. The iterative approach promotes innovation, accelerates learning, and leads to more effective design, which is the final goal of the designer. Thank you.